everyone. I'm Alex Brusso, and I am a civil engineering student at CU Denver. I anticipate to graduate May of 2024, and I have been interning at the district for 4 months, and I would like to introduce Colin Haggerty on taking a toll on Tollgate.
All right, thank you, Alex. You didn't talk about my favorite color or that I like dragons, but next time. Great. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Colin Haggerty. I'm the Sand Creek Watershed Manager, among a few other roles here at the district. I actually wanted to present last year on things that I'd learned since joining the district because I was a relatively new watershed manager at that time. But COVID had another thought. I decided to, just to be safe, take a COVID test in the morning, didn't have any symptoms. Drove in, my wife called me on the way, and she said, "Hey, your test is positive." I was like, "There's no way." She's like, "No, I'm serious." I was like, "Can you send me a picture of it?" And she wanted me to clarify she would never kid about something like that, but I think that just has a reflection of maybe my attitude on what I might have done to her at some point in time. So I did want to still talk about what I've learned since joining the district, but in a little bit of a different philosophy. I'm not going to talk about how to just develop a work plan or how to get your foot in the door to do a maintenance project. But I do want to talk about the culture that we have here today and what we can do once we're here and working together. All right. So this is our mission and our vision, and the Tollgate project is really a perfect example of what we can do when we clearly identify the goals of the project, but also what happens when things don't go exactly as we'd planned. So I'll start with a little bit of background on the project, go briefly through the design and construction, touch on some of the post-construction activities that we were doing, and then we'll analyze what happened last August during a couple of storm events, what we learned from that activity, and then how we're going to move forward from here. So a little bit on the project background. This project actually encompassed portions of East Tollgate Creek and West Tollgate Creek, as well as the confluence downstream. This is in Aurora. 6th Avenue would be at the top of the page here, with Chambers being the north-south road in this picture. So this was actually an offshoot of a project that I'd supported while I was still with Stantec, and before I go too far, there was a lot of people who were way more involved in this project than I was in the very beginning. It was really a team effort between the City of Aurora, Stantec, Olson, CEI, and even later Icon. But the project started out as a citywide assessment of Aurora's channels to determine which of the reaches were the most unstable and which ones wanted to be the priority for them to fix. So there was also a large floodplain split between East Tollgate Creek and West Tollgate Creek that the city wanted to mitigate, along with a few other priorities. In terms of project assumptions, we really wanted to make sure the guiding principles that we adhered to those guiding principles that we put down in our assumptions. The main goal was to remove that floodplain and that split flow between East Tollgate Creek to West Tollgate Creek. And we also wanted to mitigate vertical banks, provide an amenity for the community. When we recognized that it wasn't going to be feasible to armor 100% of the stretch, so we wanted to maximize the extent of the improvements that could be constructed. And as Mary had kind of alluded to earlier, HFLMS doesn't always mean a natural channel system. It just means providing the right improvements contextually through each one of the segments. So once we were finished with that assessment, we went into design and construction. And as I said, we really wanted to make sure the project goal was in mind. This is a figure that shows that floodplain split and really the impact that it has on the community here. You can see that the Peninsula townhomes were almost completely within the floodplain. And so we also wanted to stabilize the channel and provide a better overall system. We used a number of different techniques to stabilize the channel, including a few more creative techniques like stepped logs. We also used a combination of larger boulder drop structures and smaller riffles in numerous locations. We utilized an existing drop structure, which I'll discuss a little bit more later, but left some of the oxbows hydraulically connected to provide additional habitat opportunities within the watershed. Construction was still a pretty significant undertaking, even though we wanted to use a lot of the on-site materials. There was a lot of material that needed to be brought in, a lot of rock, and it was a whole team effort that was really required everybody to be involved during construction. But it was so good that the contractor CEI won the 2021 Colorado Contractors Association H2O Award, which was really a well-deserved honor for the entire team. But as we all know, the project doesn't stop once construction is complete. So we needed to establish vegetation, and that process can take many, many years. The first year was pretty dry, but we started to have a little bit of a better second year and did have some good establishment in certain areas. Prairie dogs are always an issue, but we did have these features like these willow stakes that were really performing pretty well. However, in some places you can start to see some exposed blanket that were going to become potentially an issue. All in all, the system was coming in quite nicely, but there were some interesting features that started to develop. You can see in a place like this, there's a bit of a notch that's forming between two different types of embankment protection. And this is the same feature from a different view, showing that there's something not quite right within that connection, and something we were going to go ahead and monitor as we continued, as the vegetation progressed. And then we had August of 2022 last year, where we had a cycle of a couple of pretty high intensity storms within the watershed. We actually had over 4 inches of rainfall within the Tollgate Creek watershed. And the gauge here at 6th Avenue actually showed over 2,000 CFS coming through. There's a quote that says, sometimes there are decades when nothing happens, and then weeks when decades happen. And we got the flow from an entire decade within that week. These pictures are actually of West Tollgate Creek within Horseshoe Park, which is in the upper part of the watershed. And this is after the peak had already passed, but you can see the amount of water that was coming through this system. So we knew that there were some areas that we were going to want to monitor, and we'd heard about some debris within the stream, and so we went out and did an initial assessment. From that assessment, we noticed that there were a few issues that we wanted to kind of dig into further. So we had Kate go back out there. Here's measuring some rack lines, and we identified 6 locations that we wanted to take a closer look at. We determined 4 of the areas where we could continue to monitor because they were in low-risk areas and areas that we thought could heal more naturally. But we really wanted to dig into the other 2. The first area, which was Area 2, was just west of Chambers Road on West Tollgate Creek. I mentioned earlier that we utilized an existing drop structure as part of this project, and unfortunately that feature failed during the storm event. And this stretch happens to be just downstream of that failure. You can see in this picture on the left, before the storm, there started to be a similar notch being formed in that area. And then after that, the notch had expanded and some other material had been displaced after the storm. And after looking at this picture, you can see that that material really started to get displaced and started to cause problems around it. And I think this was actually an area where we tried to protect a tree, and that tree doesn't look real good either, but I'm sure it'll provide some nice habitat at some point in time. So zooming out a little bit more, you can see that the stream really tried to stay in more of a straight line through this segment. You can actually see the failed drop structure here at the top of the screen, and you can see it might have actually had an impact on it. So looking back actually at the plans in this segment, though, we realized that we used a slightly different riffle through this segment. And this feature didn't extend up into the embankment as far as the upstream and downstream features had been done and were constructed. And because of this, it seems like the creek was able to flank the system and eroded that material. And looking at this, even stepping back a little bit further, you can see how that failed drop structure might have actually directed a short burst of an increased flow that could have helped flank the system in this location. So again, flying through from the drop structure, you can see how the channel really tried to just jump the bank in this location and created this erosion issue and some of the other impacts that it had. Thankfully, the city just finished the emergency repair of that project, and we're looking to repair these areas over the summer. The second location that we really wanted to concentrate on was near the downstream end of the project, just below the final drop structure. We can see that even in September of 22, this area was having a hard time getting vegetation established. And then again, after the storm, it seemed like this bank was starting to erode away. This photo is actually from before the August storm, and you can see that this specific location is still having a little bit of trouble getting vegetation established. And then this picture from after the storm, the post-field walk, you can see that the erosion control blanket, it almost looks like a trampoline in this area. There's no material underneath it. And I believe just due to the vegetation, it likely just moved out and wasn't able to stay stable. So again, looking at the plans in this area, you see that we actually only did soil lifts in this particular spot. And because the vegetation hadn't had a chance to establish and hadn't had a chance to really hold everything together, that material was able to migrate out and it led to erosion in this area. So what are we going to do? As I mentioned, the first location, we're looking at reconstructing that riffle with a version that extends further up into the bank. And we're also going to work on smoothing out the transitions between the different types of soil ripraps and lifts in the embankment protection. And since the project permits are actually still open for this, we're able to do that work under them. The second location, we're gonna have to strengthen the downstream protection downstream the drop a little bit more. The challenge we're still gonna have is that vegetation establishment. And as far as the original project goes, we're moving forward still with the loamer in this location to make sure that we meet that project goal of removing the floodplain from the peninsula townhomes. We're planning to work under this project under a no-rise scenario, but we'll have to look into that as we get a little bit closer. We'll continue to monitor the other locations to determine what interventions are required or if they will heal on their own. One of the things that jumps out to me from these initial assessments is that transition point between those embankment types. I realize that we need to make sure that we're taking an extra look at that in design to make sure they're put in the right place, but then also in construction to make sure that those features get translated correctly. But there's really a lot of things that I loved about this project in hydrology and hydraulics in general, and one of them is that they're not perfect. There's no single answer to every one of these questions that we're looking to answer. And as a profession, we need to continue to push ourselves to make sure that we try new things, but also learn from the projects that we've completed. The Tollgate Creek project was a successful project for many reasons, but mostly that we can learn from it. We'll continue to try these new techniques and design concepts, but we need all of you to help implement them. And I'm looking forward to the next opportunity that we get to learn from a project.